Hey everyone, today we're going to be doing ngrx store in one file. Let's do it. Okay y'all, we're going to get started by git cloning our repository and installing our dependencies. If you're just watching, or if you already know how to do this, go ahead and just skip to the next chapter and we'll get into the code there. But to clone this, I'm going to run git clone. I'm going to paste the URL for my Git repository. You can find that in the comments down below, and we'll hit enter. And that cloned our app. We're going to go and cd into it, and we're going to run npm install. And that will go out and install all of our node dependencies into the node modules directory of our project. Alright, now that we have our node modules installed, we'll go ahead and open up the project in VS Code. I've got that over here on the left side of the screen. The right side of the screen is our browser, and we're just going to open up a terminal real quick. We're going to run the command nxserve. Boom. And we'll go ahead and refresh our browser. And we can see we've got a little pizza app ready. There you go. Perfect. Alright, so looking at our project here, it's a pretty standard Angular application. If we click into the node module, we can see we've got our pizza component here. We have our app component right next to it. And we're going to bootstrap the app component. So let's jump into the app component and just see what's going on there. We can see, let's make that bigger. We can see it's just bringing in our pizza component. If we look inside of our pizza component, nothing super fancy happening yet. We got an image at the top, a button to add pepperoni, a button to add sausage, and a price. If we look at our component TypeScript, just the standard boilerplate right now. So nothing magical going on here yet. The big thing to notice though is this pizza store file. This is where all the action's going to happen. Literally. So let's get started on that. If we look at our application, we can see, I think there's going to be 4 actions that are going to be very apparent. Adding pepperoni, adding sausage, removing pepperoni, and then removing sausage. So let's get started with that here in our pizza store file. And remember, we're going to do this all in one file. So that's what we'll do. So we'll start by declaring this add pepperoni constant. So this will be our action. An action at the end of the day is just a object that contains a type, and that type property is going to be a string, and we'll define it here. So to create the proper typing around this, ngrx has a factory function called create action. We're going to go ahead and import that from ngrx store, like so. And now we're going to assign this constant to that factory function, and we're going to pass in a string, and we're going to, by convention, we're going to take this pizza detail domain is what we call it, and we'll put it in these brackets. That will tell us the locale from which this action occurred. So if we think of our pizza component here as being like a pizza detail component, I think that's the idea here. The idea being later on we could also have like a pizza list action, or a pizza list domain rather, that would show a whole series of pizzas that we could potentially add pepperoni or add sausage there. But because this action is specifically adding pepperoni, we'll go ahead and add that outside of the domain, and we've created our first action. To go ahead and create the second one, we'll go ahead and make one for remove pepperoni. Same thing here, using the factory function and passing in the string. And we'll do the same thing for sausage. Adding sausage, create action, pizza detail, add sausage. Removing sausage, create action, pizza detail, remove sausage. There we go. First step's done. All of our actions are created. And speaking of actions, why don't you take the action right now of smashing that like button, hitting subscribe, hitting the bell icon. Doing these things really helps me to grow the channel and to be able to create more content like this. And would be very appreciated if you did it. And yeah, thank you so much for if you just clicked it. And I know you did. So thanks. Okay, so now that our actions are all set up, let's go ahead and get started on our reducer. Before we get started, let's go ahead and import two things from our ngrx store package. First is create reducer. We'll use this very similarly to how we use create action. We'll see that in a sec, and we'll import this on factory function. We'll see how that's used in just a sec. So the idea for our reducer is as our user goes through and causes some of these actions to occur, the idea is the reducer is going to sit and wait and listen for any one of these actions to occur. And we are going to take a object that we're purposely setting aside so we don't have direct access to it. But we're saying as soon as any one of these actions occur, that object needs to change. And this is going to form the basis of what we call our state management, where we're going to say action occurs, that means our state needs to change. Another action occurred, state needs to change again. So to go ahead and create a reducer, we're going to use our create reducer function we just imported. And we're going to declare this constant reducer is equal to create reducer. And if we look at the API for this, we'll see right now we've got this unknown here. And this type is supposed to be the shape of that one object that should represent our state. So we're going to go ahead and create an interface for what that object should look like. So we'll go ahead and call this pizza state. And for us, this state is going to be very simple. We're going to have a Boolean property that's called has pepperoni. And we're going to create a second Boolean property called has sausage. And that's pretty much it. We'll go ahead and apply this generic to our create reducer factory function. Now you can see it good. It's expecting a pizza state and an action. And our first property we want to pass in is an initial state, which is a pizza state. So let's go ahead and create that. So before going inside of our function, we'll create an initial state here as a constant. And we'll say it is a pizza state. So this object is going to match the interface we declared here on line 12. And we'll create it just as by assigning it to an object literal. We'll assign has pepperoni to false and has sausage to false. So our initial state will have neither pepperoni or sausage, which is fine. I prefer cheese pizza anyways. But yeah, now that we have our initial state, we'll go ahead and pass that in as our first parameter to our create reducer. And you'll see now actually all our red squigglies are gone. TypeScript is satisfied with this. If we wanted to, we could just leave things like this and nothing would ever change, but this is perfectly valid. But because we want to add listeners for these actions that we declared in our previous section, we're going to take our on function here and we're going to use it to listen to each event and create a specific handler for each event. So let's see how that looks. So we'll start with the add pepperoni action. So as you can see, this actually reads pretty well. It's kind of like on an add pepperoni, and the second parameter will be a function representing how our one object needs to change. So if we create this object, or if we create this function, we're going to say this function takes a given state, it takes an action, and from those two parameters, we're going to create a new state. So the way we're going to do this is actually using the spread syntax, and that looks like this. So it's a 3 dots before our state parameter. And what this does is actually takes all the properties of our state parameter that we're passing in, and it's going to copy them one by one into this new object literal. So because our state is a pizza state, as we can see, we're going to take whatever the previous has pepperoni was and write it to the object literal, and then we're going to take whatever our has sausage property was and write that to the object literal. But because we're adding pepperoni here, we're going to, after writing both of those to memory, we are going to overwrite whatever had been in our has pepperoni property to be true. And we'll see that this actually, the spread syntax makes it so that our reducers are very simple. You see we're doing this all in one line. And yeah, it's a pretty easy pattern to follow. And generally that's how you want your reducers to be. Your reducers should never be anything too fancy. You should try to make your object, your interface here, as simple as possible. And you can see ours is pretty simple. So we'll go ahead and do the same process for our other 3 actions. You'll see for removing pepperoni, we'll start with the same thing, state object as our parameter. We'll spread it. We'll say has pepperoni is false. Moving on to add sausage, we're going to have a state for our parameter. We're going to spread it. We're going to say has sausage is true because we're adding sausage. And finally, for removing sausage, we'll spread the state. We'll say has sausage is false. And that's it. We've just created our reducer. All right, moving on to our selectors. So before we get into actually implementing this, let's just talk about real quick, what is a selector? Well, remember how we said the object we're creating with our reducer is purposely set aside so we don't have direct access to it. The idea would be a reducer is how you change that object, and the idea for a selector is a function to define how you get information out of that object. Yeah, that's essentially what a selector is. It's actually not that complicated. I think a lot of people assume it's very complicated, and indeed, if you want to get into some of the nitty-gritties and the memoization and the advanced patterns there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in selectors. And be sure to check out the comments below if you're interested in a deeper dive, because I have a pretty neat article there on how we can create our own selector factories and stuff like that. But putting all that aside, let's get started by just the very basics of creating a selector. So remember how we talked about our object. The reducer that we created in the previous step is actually to federate one property on the larger object. So when we create our selectors, the first selector we're going to create is actually a selector for the entire slice. You'll hear a lot of people talk about these properties of that larger object as a slice of your ngrx state. So if you hear that floating around, this is what it's referring to. So to get started with this, we'll import or we'll start by creating the pizza feature selector. Feature is another kind of name for this slice concept, or the property of the larger object. And we'll import our create feature selector at the top of the file. That's just a factory function created from ngrx storegan. And going down to the bottom of the file here, we'll set that equal to the this factory function. If we look at it, we've got an unknown here as a generic. So let's go ahead and use our pizza state here. And what this is going to do is it will signal to our type checking system later on as we're creating functions to pull a piece of data out of state, that the shape of the larger state is a pizza state. And next, we're going to have to name that property inside of our larger object that this reducer will be federating. So we're going to go ahead and create that by exporting this constant we'll call pizza feature name. And we'll set that here to simply pizza. And we're exporting it because we'll need to, I call it register, but we'll see how the syntax goes later. But we'll need to associate the same string with our reducer inside of our app module. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but the idea for having a constant here is to make sure that you have one source of truth for this string. And if we ever change the string, it gets changed both for our selector right here and in our app module where we register the reducer. So now that we have our pizza feature name declared, we'll go ahead and pass it in here. And now we have a selector that will take our entire object, so our entire state, and give us just the pizza property. And that's what we've done here. And we'll see, we'll use this feature selector as a building block to build our subsequent selectors. All right, so looking at our application here, the most prevalent thing about it seems to be this image of pizza. And really what we're going to want to do is show a different image here depending on our given state. So what we're going to do is create a selector that is going to look at our pizza state. And remember, we already created our feature selector for that. And we're going to take and determine from our current pizza state what the image URL should be that we should use to put inside of the image tag that represents this image up here. So we're going to go ahead and start by declaring this constant select pizza image. And we're going to go ahead and export this because this is the actual selector we'll need to import into our components or anywhere else we need to use this information. So we'll go ahead and export it. Next up, we are going to import from ngrx store this create selector factory function. What this will do is create a selector function for us, given a set of other selectors and then what's called a projector function. So let's see how this looks. So we'll use our create selector function here. You can see there is a series of potential ways we could fill this. You can see it expects between 2 and 9 arguments, but got 0 right now. So at the very minimum, we need to pass in another selector and then a projector, but we could pass up to 8, I believe, different selector functions just as arguments, and then the last argument's always going to be our projector function. So for this one, we'll just need the one selector. We'll see this, that's the pizza feature selector. And then we're going to pass in as our second argument what's called our projector function. So what our projector function is going to do is actually take all the previous arguments as selectors and take the data they return to be an argument. So this first argument is the only one we're using, is our whole pizza state. If we look at the type safety, because of this pizza state over here, it knows this selector is going to return a pizza state, which means that this pizza state is a pizza state and we can have proper type safety inside of our projector function. But the idea here is this projector function is going to return the data that this selector specifically will return. So to do this, we're actually going to need to do a little bit of fancy footwork here. And because I don't want to jam it all inside of our neat little selector here, I'm going to go ahead and declare a function up top. And we'll call it determine image URL, and we'll say this returns a string. And once we've created this is kind of like a black box we'll use for now. We'll say, let's go ahead and assign that, or have our projector function return the result of this. We actually could just pass it in as the last argument here, but that may get a little confusing. So we'll just use it like this for now. But yeah, now that we have our black box all filled out, let's go ahead and flesh out what's going on inside of this function. So if we look inside, let's do one step back real quick. If we look inside our assets directory, we can see these are the 4 images we'll use. So let's hide that again. We'll start by creating some constants for what these image URLs are actually going to be. So the first one here is for our cheese pizza image, and we'll just set that to assets_pizza.jpg. If you're following along on StackBlitz, StackBlitz doesn't allow me to do assets, so these are just going to point to random places out in the web where I found pizza images. So just a heads up if you're following along on StackBlitz. And again, check the comments below for our links to all that good stuff. But yeah, we'll have the pizza image, the pepperoni pizza image, the sausage pizza image, and then the pepperoni and sausage pizza image. So these represent just like the constants for those URLs. Inside of the function now, we want to take as the argument the pizza state, and we're going to go ahead and destructure that right away just to make the syntax a little cleaner. And then we'll flesh out the internals of this function, and this is going to be just pretty straightforward. If there's both pepperoni and sausage, return the pepperoni and sausage pizza image. Else if it has pepperoni, then do the pepperoni image. Else if it has sausage, return the sausage pizza image, and otherwise return the cheese pizza image. So yeah, that's just about did it. Our select pizza image selector will now start with the pizza selector, and then once we have data from that selector, we're going to take that and turn that pizza state into a image URL, and this will be in effect returned to our component for it to stick it inside of the source tag for this image. All right, looking at our component, the other thing we really need to select based on our store state is a price. So let's start actually with a function to determine this rather than immediately jumping into the selector. So we'll create a function here called determine price, and you'll see the signature is very similar to our determine image URL we did in the previous step. We're going to destructure out the has sausage and has pepperoni properties, and this time though we're returning a number that's going to be how much it costs rather than a string. So to flesh out this function, we'll have a starting price. So I guess this is what cheese pizza would be by itself, $12. We'll have a pepperoni price, so this would be the price to add pepperoni, and then we'll have a sausage price, and that's the price to add sausage as well. And so then to create this function based on these assets, we'll say we'll return the starting price plus, if there is pepperoni, we'll return the pepperoni price, otherwise 0. And if there is sausage, we'll add the sausage price, otherwise we'll add nothing to it. So this will in effect give us the price of our pizza, again based off the state. So now that we have this function, we'll declare our select pizza price. We'll initialize it using this create selector function. Just like the last time, we are pointed at the top level pizza state in order to determine the price. And then we'll simply take our function and just pass the name through, and this will, even though this looks a little bit different, this is doing the same exact thing as we saw here in line 71. So yeah, that will give us for any state, any possible state, that will define how to determine the price for it. In addition to our more complicated selectors here, we're going to create some simpler selectors as well, just to say whether we have pepperoni or have sausage. To create these, we'll declare them, use the create selector function again, start with the feature selector again, and this time for our projector function, we're simply taking that pizza state and we're turning it into a boolean for has pepperoni. So it's just pretty much mapping that pizza state to whether it has pepperoni or not. We're going to do the same thing here with sausage. Create the selector, pass in the feature selector, and then a simple projector function to map that pizza state to its has sausage property. And there we go. All of our selectors are created. Now, before we move on, the one thing, and this is the most important thing you could maybe get as a result of watching this video, as you create your state management solution and you're using ngrx, if your reducers are very complicated, try to change things around so that the complexity is in your selectors and not in your reducer. You'll thank me for this later. We see this a lot in the consulting we do. A lot of people try to put a lot of logic into their reducers. Really, you want your reducer to be very simple state transition from one property to another. If you can do it in one line, great, but try to keep it very straightforward. It should essentially be just a return statement that has a way to get from your previous state to the next one, right? And for anything complicated here, like you'll see, we put nothing regarding price into our state object. We did nothing regarding our image into the state object. We are putting this information instead into our selectors. This just makes for more frictionless architecture going forward. So like I said, you'll thank me for this later. And remember, put your complicated stuff inside your selectors, not in your reducer. Okay, but on a bright note, we have accomplished our goal. All of our ngrx assets are now here in one file, and all we have to do now is hook everything up, and we should have a working application. So let's see how that works. All right, the first step in hooking all this up with the rest of our app is to go into our AppModule. We are going to import from ngrx store our StoreModule. We are going to import from our pizza store file we were just working with both the reducer and the pizza feature name. And so what we'll do is we'll take our StoreModule up here in line 5. We'll add it to our imports array, and then if we look at StoreModule, there's a bunch of methods, static methods on this module. We're going to use the for_root static method. What this will do is signal that we are at the root of our project, and what we need to pass into this method is what's called a action reducer map. That sounds fancy, but really all it is an object that's going to map our feature name to a reducer. So since we only have the one slice for this application, we'll simply do that by taking our pizza feature name. Again, this is just pizza, and set that to the reducer. So like we had said before, this reducer is going to federate this slice of our object, and we're just in this line associating that reducer with that specific feature name, and that's all that's there. So that's it for the app module. At this point, our Angular app is creating this object for us. On initialization, it's being set to that initial object we created where has pepperoni is false and has sausage is false. And we'll see as we go into our pizza component, we can do some stuff in there to make our app fully responsive to the user clicking various buttons and whatnot. All right, moving on to our component TypeScript class, we are going to start by importing the store from our ngrx store package. We're also going to import our 4 actions that we created inside of, well, those aren't the right ones, but these two, and then like these 2. There we go. So we have our 4 actions from our pizza store, and then our 4 selectors as well. So those are our 4 selectors right there. So all of our assets now are coming in from the one file we created already. And we'll go in and use dependency injection to inject our store to our component. Then we will create a property here. This is an image URL property that we are using the $sign at the end here. This is called finish notation. I'm not sure actually why it's called finish notation, but it's here to signify that this will be observable. And we'll set that to the store.select method and pass in now our select pizza image selector. So that's it. We now have our image URL property, which is an observable of a string. We'll do the same thing here for price. Again, $sign for finish notation to show it's an observable. And we'll call select on our store and pass in our select pizza price selector. And if we look at the type or the IntelliSense for this, we'll see it's an observable of a number as we expect. We'll go ahead and do this for has pepperoni as well and has sausage as well. Just same thing as before, but with these 2 other selectors. All right, now that our observables are all set up, we're going to add a couple methods for click handlers for these buttons over here. So to do this, we'll start by adding the pepperoni click method. We're going to take this pepperoni property up here, has pepperoni. We're going to actually subscribe to this inside of our template using the async pipe later on. And then we'll pass the values emitted from that observable through the template back into the component store here and have it as a parameter of this pepperoni click. And so what we'll do inside this method is we're going to take our store, and the store object that gets injected has what's called a dispatch method on it. Now the idea for this is on a event like this, the user clicking something, we will create a new object which will represent our action, the action that the user is taking, and dispatch it to the store. This will trigger the reducer to churn to create a new state object. And then with the new state object, all of our selectors will kind of have beamed into them new data. So you can maybe think of it that way. But we are going to look at our has pepperoni parameter. If there is pepperoni, we're going to want to remove it. So we'll take our remove pepperoni action we created, and we're actually going to call it as a method. This is itself a factory function for just a remove pepperoni object. That the object is just going to have a single property that's type, that's just refers to the string. If we don't have pepperoni, we're going to go ahead and add it. Same thing here. And then we'll do the same thing for sausage, for a sausage click. We'll dispatch on the store. If we have sausage, we'll remove it. If we don't have sausage, we'll add it. And that's that. Let's go ahead and look in the template next. All right, home stretch. Let's get this template all set up. So we'll start with our image, and we'll take this source, which is currently always going to be pointed at the cheese pizza JPEG. We'll instead take that, and we'll set it to we'll put these brackets around the source, which will tell Angular instead of just immediately writing the contents of these double quotes to evaluate it and then write it to the DOM. So what we'll use here is our image URL, and we'll pass that to the async pipe. And if we hit save on that, we're still seeing cheese pizza now because our initial state does it have pepperoni or sausage? So we just see our cheese pizza. But if we go down here, let's update our price. We'll do the same thing here. So we'll use the double braces here for a binding. We'll use our price. We'll pipe that to the async pipe. Hit save there. And as we do this, we can see our prices updating appropriately. Okay, hang on to your seats for a little bit because the last step is a bit of a doozy. But I will show you how I think is the best way to handle this kind of template tree magic. So we have our two buttons here. I've removed all the contents from them because we're going to kind of rework them a little bit. The first step we'll focus on the first pepperoni button here. We are going to wrap the button inside of an ng container. Now, an ng container is a way you can put a element inside of your template in Angular that will not make its way into the DOM. So it's kind of like abstracted away and obfuscated. It's a way you can put something in your template that you don't want to, actually clutter your DOM tree as you do things. So we'll use the ng container, and we're going to use this ngrx let directive, structural directive on this. And the ngrx let structural directive is like similarly to the async pipe. It's going to take the observable we pass into it and subscribe to it, and it's going to give us the ability to reference it via this has pepperoni symbol that we'll be able to use anywhere inside of this ng container scope. So now that we've subscribed to our has pepperoni and kind of have that as a boolean that we can kind of play around with, we'll take our button and we'll add an on-click listener here, and we'll say this is a pepperoni click, and we'll pass in that boolean which is has pepperoni. And for the text of the button, we'll say if we do have pepperoni, we'll put remove in the button to signify you can take it off. Otherwise, we'll have add there to signify you can add. If we save this, we should see now our button is active. We're starting out in our cheese state, so if we add pepperoni, we see the image changes to be an image with just pepperoni. Our price changes. Everything's kind of like syncing up now. So the next step is to just do the same thing to our sausage button. Like before, we wrap it inside of this ng container, take ngrx let, has sausage observable that we declared on our class, and now the local reference has sausage. And then add the on-click listener for a sausage click and pass through that boolean value. And then finally for the text, we either remove or add based on that same boolean, and we add sausage at the end. And if we save that, we should be all set now. So let's see, if we add pepperoni, we see a pizza with pepperoni and our prices change. If we add sausage, we see pepperoni and sausage on our pizza, price is different. If we remove pepperoni, we see an only sausage pizza, and our price is different again. So we can kind of play around with this as much as we want, but it's kind of cool. It's interesting to see, like, there's no progress, and then at the very last step, it's like all there. But that's kind of cool. It's kind of satisfying to have, and we've got it. We've got a working app. We built it all with all of our ngrx code in one file. If we look at our kind of code footprint here, our template's fairly small, 15 lines. Our TypeScript component is pretty small, 36 lines. And that's including 12 lines of import statements. And if we look at our store, our pizza store, this is a larger file, 84 lines, but still nothing crazy. So I don't know. I really like this pattern. I will be using single page ngrx files for the foreseeable future, I believe. And ever since ngrx 8 came out, that introduced this more succinct syntax, I really love it. I love the factory functions. I love a lot of stuff about this. The type safety, it's amazing. But yeah, thanks for watching. Again, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, please like and subscribe. Really helps me out in terms of trying to grow the channel. And leave a comment too if you want with any questions, and I'll try to address anything that comes through. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye all.